Hey everyone! For this session, we have a special treat for you. Originally, this was just going to be about step 8, but as you will hear, there's a lot more to it. In just a moment, you'll be hearing from our friend Ashton, who works in our community helping people with their recoveries. Ashton has been clean since May of 2017. She's been in the substance abuse field for the last 4 years and just passed her certified alcohol and drug counselor exam. She is a truly gifted and unique individual, but sadly her story is a lot like many that we hear. She took her first drink at the age of 12 and blacked out. Shortly after that, she used marijuana for the first time. Even at that young age, she thought she'd found the solution to all of her problems. And why not? Her family tree reinforced that message through their own addictions. Like so many of us, booze and weed were the gateway. By 16, she started using coke and ecstasy. By 21, it was heroin and meth. It nearly took her life. But that wasn't the end of her story. It was just the beginning. Recovery has reunified, strengthened, and restored everything for Ashton that addiction took away, and then some. She has changed her life, and today she strives to be the best mom that she can while helping others achieve what she has. Here she is.
Hi, my name is Ashton. I'm a gratefully recovering addict. Thank you for letting me share with you my experience with steps 9 and recovery in general. To me, making amends brings freedom and healing from guilt and shame. But it's also about finding my voice. The most powerful part of the amends process for me was the awareness and light bulb moments I experienced coming out of denial that had been keeping me trapped in addiction for years. I experienced this in steps leading up to step 9 and in the actual making of the amends. When I was exhausted enough from being beat up from the game of addiction and addictive lifestyle, after many years of multiple rock bottoms, such as jails and institutions, I found a sense of willingness and I was finally able to surrender to the fears. Fears I can now identify as the fear of being alone. But I was more tired than I was scared. My perspective had greatly changed in working steps 4 through 8. My fear being alone was shown to not hold any weight. I now had a sense of peace of my God with me and had gained trust back, remaining vulnerable and uncomfortable. I worked diligently and honestly with my sponsor one-on-one. I submerged myself into step work for nearly a year through self-reflection work and personal time, followed by 2-hour one-on-one meetings every week. I shared my deepest, darkest, I put myself out there, and I found intimacy with another person in a healthy way. I stepped out of shame, I began to heal from the traumas I had experienced in addiction, and I did some soul searching. I found a new perspective, why I was who I was, and why I did what I did. This took me out of the cycle of shame and allowed me to no longer be the victim, but to find truth and live in victory. I had never before given myself the permission to identify my adverse life experiences as negatively affecting me or the way I dealt with life. The childhood life experiences such as my parents' lack of coping skills, which was not their fault, but just how things were, and how it affected me. My sister's chronic illness that took the attention and priority of our family most of the time. The denial weighed heavy because there were good times weaved throughout these life experiences. I never allowed myself to recognize how the hard parts impacted me in a life-changing way. I was stuck in a hardened mindset of what I thought was being tough, respectful, and grateful for what I had. But it resulted in inability to function, being hurt and broken, disrespecting myself and hurting everyone, especially the ones I love the most, and living a life of self-will and entitlement. A veil was over my eyes, the drugs were my band-aid, and my tolerance was so high, as well as my pain continuing to grow, that my means of survival were no longer effective. I was selling myself short of my truth, but I now had the ability to change. Because I did not experience childhood abuse, the sense of abandonment that I did inadvertently experience was insignificant, and this layered over time with grief due to the loss of my sister, my negative emotions and experiences due to my choices, grief due to the loss of my boyfriend, abuse and trauma from living on the streets and in a drug-addicted lifestyle. All these factors eventually led me to being insignificant and being belittled by my identity being in drugs alone. Once the awareness and enlightenment came, with all the time and work that led up to step 9, it allowed me to make my way back to mental, spiritual, and physical stability, to find somewhat of a homeostasis from using heroin and meth for nearly 10 years. Only then was I able to have some self-control, and I began to work on all of my unhelpful behavior and thought patterns that prevented me from appropriately functioning in the world. I knew just the basics of coping skills. I began and strengthened my relationship with God, began to learn some healthy communication skills, and began to work on changing my codependent behavior. I opened myself up to God's will and not my own. Steps 4 through 7 were a process of sifting through all that was weighing heavy on my heart and sharing all the junk floating around inside me, taking up space within me, preventing my heart from being well. This took listening to myself and God, and taking the action of putting a pen to paper, writing down all that I heard. I was blessed to be introduced to the structured step work guide of Celebrate Recovery. After writing everything down, I shared boldly with God, myself, and one other person, my sponsor. I remained willing and open-minded, had at that point formed a sense of trust with my sponsor that allowed me to listen to her perspective of what I shared with her. I grew through it and took her outlook into consideration. I took her feedback and found new awakenings on my life. I took her suggestions when it came to the emotional and physical effects and triggers that were dredging up throughout this process. I remained committed when she pushed me to look deeper into certain areas. I used my inventory to make a list of all the people I felt I needed to make amends with and those that I needed to forgive. For each person, my sponsor and I decided together if there was a conversation that needed to be had or not. The people that had wronged me or that I had wronged that did not need communication were those that speaking to would have been detrimental to my recovery or their well-being. In those cases, I did writing assignments, read them out loud, prayed, and processed letting go. The people closest to me had already experienced my living amends by that point in my recovery. A living amends is basically treating people with respect and gaining trust through our consistent actions. We don't talk about our recovery or try to convince anyone we've changed. We demonstrate it through our behaviors. While I believe a living amends is more powerful than words, I did follow it up with conversations about specific times, events, or actions that weighed heavy on me. The amends process was 100% for me. When I made amends to others for my wrongdoings, it freed me from holding on to those wrongdoings and storing them within myself. The guilt, shame, and remorse I held that fed the unhealthy cycles in my life no longer had a hold on me. The relationships had already begun to be reconciled, but the power in the words being spoken out loud gave me freedom from holding on to those negative experiences, and they no longer defined me. They were things I'd done. They were not who I was. I feel that my amends process was balanced. What I mean by that is that I did not just communicate how I had harmed others, but I also gave myself the opportunity to express directly to those involved how my own life circumstances had affected me. and how that contributed to my behaviors. I was very careful not to make excuses for myself, but I was vulnerable in letting the person see a bit of myself and how that impacted my decisions. Doing that gave me a sense of getting my power back. It allowed me to find my voice that had been lost long ago, and it provided me with the ability to break down emotional walls that were an obstacle to my growth. Timing and recovery maturity were key to this experience. Because I waited for the right time, and I expected nothing. Some of the conversations I had resulted in acceptance of my amends. Some resulted in healing responses or opened up a door for the person I was making amends with. In some cases, I received amends back, which I think played a role in the other person's process of healing. Some resulted in no response at all, but I was in a place where I was okay with that. It did not disappoint me, no matter how the person responded, because I was doing it for the purpose of freeing myself. I've heard the 12 steps summarized as this before: clean house, trust God, and help others. After doing the steps initially, I've continued to do them so I do not get stagnant or complacent. I do not want to slip back into old behavior of denial, but instead continue to grow and move forward, because I know for me that remaining the same is a slow slide backwards. One of the gifts of recovery has been a hunger for more. The blessing of the peace and empowerment that all this work gives me. Now I know the taste of the good life from the inside out, and no other way of living satisfies. It is only a fallacy. I continue to work through these steps, and I am now quicker to make amends when they are due. I am diligent to stay in the solution and better equipped to recognize the warning signs of complacency. Working a 10th step and frequent inventory helps me continue being aware of taking a look at what I could have done differently, and if a conversation is needed, and I will have it. Although initiating these conversations can be awkward and uncomfortable, it is important for me to not let things pile up. I allow myself time to process my feelings and emotions. I discuss with my sponsor and or support people, and then I can express where I feel I went wrong. I make sure to focus on I statements when communicating how something has affected me or how my actions may have affected the other person. I allow myself the space and support to work on boundaries and follow through. The balance between assertiveness and humility when exploring my character defects and actions, thoughts, or behaviors is a work in progress, but becomes more fluent the more I practice. This practice includes the continued amends process. Working steps 8 and 9 made all of this possible. All of this work and growth has given me the ability to be comfortable with myself. As the guys talk about throughout this video series, self-esteem and self-acceptance are core issues for many addicts. I'm certainly no exception to that. But I am living proof that with sobriety through working the program, it has given me the ability to love myself in all of my imperfections. Get humble and be okay with not being okay. To find my truth and my identity in a healthy way. Did I love myself right away? No. But the external motivations I had, such as my son, were temporary, as I soon found a love for myself that was empowering, worthy, and kept me continuing my journey. All of that focus on myself ultimately gave me the ability to help others. Hopefully, I was able to help someone out there today. Thank you for letting me share my story.
Thank you so much for sharing your story with us, Ashton. Hopefully you all heard what is possible when we make the decision to turn our will and our lives over. And you can see that no matter how far we fall, there is always hope. Next week, we'll get back to our regularly scheduled program and talk about making our amends list as we get ready for step 9. We'll see you then.